Mail-order bride was rejected for being already pregnant until the Amish man said, "She's mine." The train screeches to a halt in a dusty Colorado town. A young woman steps down, clutching her carpetbag, her secret heavy for all to see. Whispers rise like wildfire. The man who sent for her takes one look at her rounded belly and spits a word that cuts deeper than any blade. Fraud. Shamed, cast out. She sinks onto a bench, tears burning as the townsfolk turn their backs. The church bell tolls like a verdict. Then from the shadows of the platform comes a steady voice. An Amish man steps forward, plain as stone, and declares before them all, "She's mine." Gasps ripple through the crowd, but this is no rescue without cost. A disgraced soldier lurks, claiming the unborn child. The law is twisting. The railroad is hungry for land. And the line between duty and love is about to be tested. Can faith and sacrifice hold a family together, or will the past tear them apart forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hannah clutched her carpetbag tighter as whispers swirled around her like autumn leaves. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden platform, making the disapproving faces of the townspeople seem even harsher. Her legs trembled beneath her dusty traveling dress as she watched her last hope, the widowed rancher who was supposed to be her husband, storm away in disgust. Trying to trap a good man with another's child, a woman muttered loud enough for Hannah to hear. The words stabbed at her heart like tiny daggers. "Shameful business," another voice added. "Coming out here to deceive honest folk." Hannah's throat tightened as she tried to speak, to explain, but no words came. The small Colorado rail town's residents continued their harsh judgment, their whispers growing louder with each passing moment. Ladies in their proper bonnets turned away, shielding their children's eyes as if her presence alone might corrupt them. Men who had been unloading cargo suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Leaving her alone on the platform, she sank onto a hard wooden bench, her legs no longer able to support her. The weight of her unborn child seemed heavier than ever as she placed one protective hand over her rounded belly. Tears blurred her vision as she watched the townsfolk disperse, leaving her isolated in her shame. The station master emerged from his office, eyeing her with clear disapproval. "Station closes at sunset. Miss Kant, have you staying here all night?" Hannah opened her carpetbag with shaking fingers, though she already knew what she would find. The few coins she had left wouldn't buy her a night's lodging, let alone a ticket back east. The last of her money had gone to reaching this town, a town that now rejected her completely. The sun dipped lower, painting the mountains in the distance with purple shadows. A cool wind whistled through the platform, carrying the lonely sound of a distant train whistle. Hannah shivered, drawing her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts. Could she sleep in an alley? Behind the station? Would anyone even notice if she curled up in the shadows until morning? "Lord," she whispered, her German accent thickening with emotion, "I know I have sinned, but please, please don't forsake my baby." She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the slight movement within that had become her only comfort. The platform had nearly emptied now. The station master was closing up his office, shooting disapproving glances her way as he checked the locks. Hannah could see lights coming on in the windows of nearby houses, families gathering for their evening meals. The sight made her chest ache with loneliness. A train whistle sounded in the distance, not approaching, but departing from another town miles away. The sound seemed to mock her predicament, reminding her that she was truly stranded. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the platform, and with them came the crushing realization that she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She began to weep quietly, her shoulders shaking as she tried to muffle the sound with her hand. The shame of her public rejection mixed with pure fear for her future and her baby's future. The soldier who had promised to marry her back in New York, then disappeared, had left her with more than just a broken heart. Now she was here. An ocean away from her family in Germany, rejected once again. The sound of boots on the wooden platform made her tense, expecting more harsh words or another order to leave. But instead, a quiet voice spoke from behind her. A voice that would change everything. The gentle tone was like a beacon of hope in her darkest moment. Hannah remained still, hardly daring to breathe, waiting to hear what would come next. After the crushing rejection she had just endured, even this small kindness, someone speaking to her without contempt, felt like a precious gift. Hannah's hands trembled in her lap as she waited for the owner of that voice to continue. The last light of day painted the sky in deep purples and blues, and the evening star had just begun to shine above the distant mountains. In that moment, suspended between despair and hope, Hannah felt her baby move again, as if reminding her that she wasn't truly alone. Whatever came next, she would face it with the quiet strength that had carried her across an ocean and halfway across a continent, seeking a new life in this vast, unforgiving land. Behind Hannah, boots scuffed against wooden planks. "She's mine," a steady voice declared. Hannah turned, tears still wet on her cheeks. A tall man in plain dark clothing stood there, his broad-brimmed black hat shading eyes that held neither judgment nor shame. His beard was neatly trimmed, his manner direct but gentle. Gasps rippled through the remaining townsfolk. The station master paused in his closing routine, keys dangling forgotten in his hand. Even the evening birds seemed to quiet their songs. "Noel Yoder," someone whispered, "the Amish carpenter." Noel stepped forward, his presence solid and calm amid the tension. "I cannot abide seeing a woman and child cast out," he said, his voice carrying across the platform. No baby should be born bearing shame. Hannah's heart thundered in her chest. This stranger, this plain-clothed man who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers, was claiming her. She searched his face for any sign of mockery or ill intent, but found only steadfast certainty. "Brother Yoder," the station master began. "Surely you don't mean to." "I do mean it," Noel cut in firmly. "The matter is settled." He turned to Hannah, extending a weathered hand. "Come, my wagon is waiting." Hannah hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was strong, but gentle as he helped her to her feet. The wooden platform creaked beneath them as he lifted her carpet bag with his free hand. Whispers followed them as they walked away from the station, but Noel's presence seemed to shield her from their sting. His wagon waited nearby, two solid draft horses standing patient in their harnesses. Without ceremony, he helped her up onto the hard wooden seat. The setting sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples as they left the town behind. The wagon jolted over the rough road, each bump making Hannah grip the seat tighter. She watched farmhouses appear and disappear in the growing darkness, their lanterns glowing like earthbound stars in the valley below. Questions tumbled through her mind like leaves in a storm. Why had this stranger claimed her? What did he expect? In return, the soldier's empty promises still haunted her. Would this man prove just as false? Noel drove in silence, his hands steady on the reins. The only sounds were the creak of leather harness, the rumble of wooden wheels, and the occasional snort from the horses. Hannah's back ached from the hard seat and the long day of travel, but she dared not complain. Finally, Noel spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I have a daughter, Ruth. She's 6 years old." He paused, then added, "My wife passed 2 winters ago." Hannah nodded, understanding flowing through her. A widower with a young child, perhaps he simply needed help with his household. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly, her German accent thick with fatigue. The wagon turned onto a narrower road, then through a gate marked with a simple wooden sign. In the growing darkness, Hannah could make out a solid farmhouse, a barn, and several outbuildings. A small figure stood in the doorway, lamplight spilling around her. Ruth Yoder was a tiny thing, with her father's direct gaze and a wary set to her shoulders. She wore a plain dress and white cap, her feet bare on the wooden porch. As Hannah climbed down from the wagon, their eyes met and held. "Ruth," Noelle said, "this is Hannah. She will be staying with us." The child said nothing, but her gaze flickered between her father and Hannah, questions clear in her expression. Hannah's heart ached for her. This small girl who had lost her mother, now watching a stranger enter her home. Inside, the house was plain but neat. A quilted cushion softened a wooden rocking chair by the hearth. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and a well-scrubbed table dominated the main room. Everything spoke of order and simplicity. Ruth moved silently to help her father prepare a simple supper of bread, cheese, and cold meat. Hannah sat where Noel indicated, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every bone. The quiet was broken only by the clink of plates and the soft whisper of cloth. Against wood, as they ate their plain meal, Hannah felt the enormity of the day's events settle over her. That morning, she had stepped off the train full of fear, but also hope. Now, she sat at a stranger's table, claimed by a man she had never met. Watching his silent daughter steal glances at her when she thought Hannah wasn't looking, the lamplight cast warm shadows on the whitewashed walls and through the window. Hannah could see stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for now she had a roof over her head and food in her belly. It would have to be enough. The morning sun filtered through thin muslin curtains, casting delicate patterns across Hannah's face. She blinked awake in the spare room of Noelle's farmhouse. The unfamiliar creaks and settling sounds of the building still strange to her ears. A rooster's crow pierced the dawn, followed by the rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood. Hannah rose, carefully, her hand instinctively cradling her rounded belly. The wooden floorboards were cool beneath her feet as she dressed in her simple gray dress. Through the small window, she could see Noel already at work, his steady movements precise. As he split logs for the cook stove, his plain black suspenders stretched across his broad shoulders. His hat set aside while he worked. Ruth stood nearby, watching her father with unwavering attention. The little girl's bare feet shuffled in the morning dew, one hand clutching her worn rag doll while the other reached out occasionally to touch Noel's leg, as if reassuring herself of his presence. When Hannah stepped onto the porch, Ruth's eyes darted toward her, quick and wary as a sparrow's. "Good morning," Noel said, pausing. In his work, sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "There's breakfast inside, corn mush and fresh milk." Hannah nodded her thanks, moving toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Ruth's feet pattering across the porch, following her father as he carried an armload of split wood inside. The kitchen was plain but well-ordered, with copper pots hanging from iron hooks and a row of preserves lined up on wooden shelves as Hannah stirred the corn mush in its iron pot. Noel cleared his throat. "About our arrangement," he began, his voice steady but formal. "This marriage was duty, not courtship. You needed protection, and I could provide it." He met her eyes directly. "You need not fear shame here. What's past is past." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion. "Danke," she whispered, the German word slipping out before she could stop it. "Thank you." Ruth watched this exchange from behind her father's chair, her small fingers twisted in the fabric of his shirt. When Hannah placed bowls of steaming mush before them, the child accepted hers with silent caution, waiting until her father began eating before picking up her own spoon. After breakfast, Hannah found purpose in the familiar rhythms of housework. She gathered Ruth's spare dress from a wooden peg, noting the torn hem and faded fabric. The wash basin was heavy to carry, but the morning air was fresh, and the simple task of scrubbing fabric clean felt like a step toward belonging. Near the house, a small vegetable patch showed signs of neglect. Hannah knelt carefully in the soft earth, pulling weeds from around young tomato plants and tender lettuce leaves. The soil was rich and dark beneath her fingers, and she felt a spark of hope. This, at least, was something she could tend and nurture. Inside, she found flour and yeast, the ingredients familiar from her childhood in Germany. The steady motion of kneading bread dough soothed her racing thoughts. Ruth perched on a kitchen stool, watching intently as Hannah's hands worked the dough into smooth submission. "Would you like to help?" Hannah asked softly. But Ruth just shook, her head sliding off the stool to disappear into the other room. The day passed in a rhythm of simple tasks. Hannah hung the wash to dry in the warm breeze, prepared a modest dinner of beans and cornbread, and swept the rough wooden floors. With each completed chore, she felt a small measure of dignity return. This was honest work, done with willing hands. As evening settled over the farmstead, clouds gathered in the western sky. Wind whistled through the eaves, and Hannah listened to its lonely song as she sat in the kitchen, darning a sock by lamplight. From the main room came Noel's steady voice, reading from his German Bible. The familiar words washed over her, words of mercy, of refuge, of hope. Ruth sat pressed against her father's side, her small face serious as she followed along. The lamp cast warm shadows across their faces, making them look like figures in a painting Hannah had once seen of a holy family. Her heart ached with longing. Would she ever truly belong here? Did she deserve this chance at a new life? Hannah's hand stilled in her lap as she offered a silent prayer. She asked not for happiness that seemed too much to hope for, but for courage. Courage to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Courage to build something meaningful from duty. Courage to believe that even she might find grace. The wind continued its plaintive song, but inside the farmhouse there was warmth and order, and the beginning of peace. 2 weeks passed like water flowing in a steady stream. Each day brought its own rhythm of familiar tasks that Hannah grew to know well. The crunch of dawn frost under her boots as she collected eggs. The warmth of fresh milk against the tin pail. The quiet contentment of kneading bread while mourning. Light streamed through the kitchen window. Noel began trusting her with more responsibilities around the farmstead. "The mare needs brushing," he said one morning, showing Hannah how to curry the dappled horse with slow, gentle strokes. "She gets skittish with strangers, but she seems to take to you." Ruth's wariness softened too, like ice melting in spring. One afternoon, she approached Hannah with tiny wooden figures clutched in her small hands. "This one's a horse," she whispered, holding up a carved toy that showed signs of much love. "Papa made it for me." Though she scampered away soon after, Hannah treasured these small offerings of trust. That Saturday dawned clear and cool. "We need supplies," Noel announced over breakfast. "All of us will go to town." Hannah's heart quickened. She hadn't been back since that first day on the train platform. But Ruth's excitement was catching as they loaded into the wagon, the little girl pointing out jackrabbits and meadowlarks. Along the dusty road, the general store bell tinkled as they entered. Hannah helped Noel select flour, coffee, and sugar, while Ruth pressed her nose against the candy jar. The shopkeeper's wife smiled at them now, nodding approval at Hannah's neat appearance and quiet manner. It felt almost like belonging, but peace shattered like a dropped plate when they stepped onto the boardwalk. A man's rough voice cut through the morning air. "Well, well, look who we have here." Hannah's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. The soldier stood there, uniform ragged and whiskey on his breath, his eyes fixed on her rounded belly with predatory interest. Hannah instinctively stepped backward, trembling. "That's my child you're carrying," he announced loudly, his words. Slurring, people stopped to stare. Wagons halted in the street. The soldier sneered, taking a step closer. Did you think you could hide from me forever, girl? Stay back. Noel's quiet voice carried steel as he moved in front of Hannah. Ruth clutched her father's leg, eyes wide with fear. The soldier spat tobacco juice onto the boardwalk. This ain't your concern, plain man. That woman worked as a servant in my boarding house back east. She's carrying my blood, and I aim to claim what's mine. His hand brushed his hip where a pistol hung. Whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Hannah felt their stares like physical blows, shame burning her cheeks. But Noel didn't move. She's my wife now, he said firmly. The child is mine in the eyes of God and law. Go your way. Your wife? The soldier laughed harshly. You're a fool, taking in damaged goods. But I'll be back for what belongs to me. He stumbled away, leaving behind the stench of cheap whiskey and threat. The ride home was silent, except for the creak of wagon wheels and Ruth's occasional sniffles. Hannah's hands trembled in her lap as fields rolled past, golden in the afternoon. Sun. She had prayed this part of her past would never find her here. That evening, after Ruth was asleep, Hannah found Noel sitting alone at the kitchen table. His Bible opened before him. Words spilled from her like water from a broken dam. Broken dam. I was a servant at a boarding house in Pennsylvania, she whispered. He was staying there, wore a fine uniform, spoke such gentle words at first. Her voice caught. He promised marriage, but it was all lies. When I discovered, I was with child. He had already disappeared. The mistress dismissed me in shame. Noel listened without movement, his face grave in the lamplight. When Hannah fell silent, he closed his Bible slowly. The past is the past, he said at last. But trouble has begun. That man means to cause harm. What will we do? Hannah asked, her voice small in the quiet kitchen. Noel's eyes met hers steadily. We will pray, he said, and we will be watchful. God gives strength to those who need it. He didn't offer false comfort or condemnation, just the solid certainty of his presence and protection. Hannah nodded, gathering her shawl around her shoulders as she rose. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the dark sky like grains of salt on black cloth. Somewhere out there, evil lurked. But here in this kitchen, with the lingering smell of bread and the soft glow of lamplight, she found a fragment of peace in knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Tension settled over the farmstead like an invisible fog. Noel spent long hours mending the split-trail fences that marked his property lines, his hammer echoing across the fields from sunrise to sunset. The steady rhythm of his work seemed to Hannah like a shield against unseen threats. Hannah found comfort in the daily rituals of farm life. She gathered eggs each morning, her fingers brushing warm shells beneath sleeping hens. The vegetable garden became her sanctuary, where she could lose herself in the simple tasks of weeding and watering. Little Ruth followed her like a shadow, carrying a tin cup to help water the tender shoots of corn and beans. One evening, as golden sunset light spilled through the kitchen window, they sat together at the worn wooden table. Steam rose from bowls of beef stew, and the fresh-baked bread filled the room with its homey scent. Ruth pushed her spoon through her stew, unusually quiet. "Miss Hannah," she finally whispered, her small voice trembling with uncertainty. "When the baby comes, will he be my brother?" Hannah's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes and dropped silently into her bowl. She couldn't speak past the emotion that closed her throat. Noel set down his spoon, his steady gaze moving from his daughter to Hannah. "Yes," he said firmly. "This home will be for us all. The baby will be family, just as we all are family now." Ruth's face brightened like sunshine breaking through clouds. She nodded solemnly and returned to her stew, content with her father's simple declaration. But peace proved fragile. Word spread through town like wildfire. The soldier had taken up residence in the saloons, drinking heavily and boasting loudly about his plans. "I'll drag that German girl back where she belongs," he would slur to anyone who would listen. "She can't hide behind that plain man forever." The gossip reached even the scattered Amish families in the valley. One afternoon, 3 of Noel's kinsmen arrived in their plain black buggies. Hannah watched from the kitchen window as they spoke with Noel in the yard, their serious faces and gesturing hands telling her all she needed to know about their concerns. "Brother Yoder," she heard one say, his voice carrying on the wind, "we worry about this worldly influence in your home." "This woman's past. She is my wife now," Noel interrupted quietly but firmly. "The Lord commands us to show mercy, does he not? I will not cast out those in need." Hannah's hands trembled as she kneaded bread dough, but Noel's steady defense wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. Desperate to prove her worth to the community, Hannah began attending quilting gatherings with neighboring farmwives. They accepted her presence with cautious politeness, but whispers followed her like persistent shadows. "Poor Noel Yoder," she overheard one woman murmur behind her hand. "Taking in such trouble, that soldier in town makes terrible threats," another added. "Mark my words, no good will come of this." Hannah bent over her neat stitches, each one a silent prayer for acceptance. The quilt pattern was called Jacob's Ladder, its straight lines climbing toward heaven like her hopes for redemption. That night, after Ruth had been tucked into bed with her wooden horse clutched tight, Hannah found Noel reading his Bible by lamplight. The yellow flame cast dancing shadows on the walls as she sank into the chair across from him. "I fear this child will bring a curse to your household," she whispered, her hand resting on her growing belly. "The soldier's threats, the town's judgment. Even your own people's doubt. Perhaps I should have moved on, spared you this burden." Noel closed his Bible slowly, his weathered hands gentle on the worn leather cover. "Grace makes no curse," he said simply. His deep voice held the same quiet certainty that marked everything he did. "Where others see burden, I see blessing. Where they see shame, I see strength." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear or shame. Something warm and bright kindled in her chest, hope, as delicate and precious as a newly hatched chick. She watched Noel's steady hands as he opened his Bible again, listened to his soft voice reading familiar words in his native German tongue. The lamp flame flickered, casting their shadows on the wall, no longer separate, but joined together like the pieces of her quilting pattern, climbing toward something higher. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus, and a cool breeze carried the sweet scent of ripening corn through the open window. Ruth's soft breathing drifted down from upstairs, peaceful and trusting. In that moment, Hannah felt the first real stirrings of belonging, as if invisible threads were slowly binding her to this place. This family, this quiet man who offered shelter without judgment. The July sun blazed overhead like a brass kettle, turning the air thick and heavy. Hannah dabbed her forehead with a handkerchief as Noel guided their wagon down the dusty road toward the Amish meeting house. Little Ruth sat between them on the wooden seat, her small black bonnet shading her face from the merciless summer heat. The wagon wheels creaked to steady rhythm over the packed earth. Other buggies and wagons appeared ahead and behind them, all heading to Sunday meeting. Hannah smoothed her plain dress, conscious of its simple cut and dark fabric. After weeks of living among the Amish, she still felt like a sparrow among doves. The meeting house came into view, a weathered wooden building, without steeple or decoration. Noel helped Hannah down from the wagon, his calloused hand steady and warm. Ruth hopped down on her own, kicking up a small cloud of dust with her leather shoes dot inside. The room held nothing but plain wooden benches and unadorned walls. No crosses, no paintings, no altar, just clean-swept floors and windows letting in the morning light. Hannah settled onto a hard bench between Noelle and Ruth. Aware of the curious glances from other families, the service began with profound silence. Hannah shifted uncomfortably on the wooden seat, unused to worship without music or preaching. Yet, as minutes passed, she found herself drawn into the deep quiet. She watched Noelle from the corner of her eye, admiring how naturally he sat in the stillness. His face held peaceful certainty, like a man who knew exactly where he belonged. When spoken ministry finally broke the silence, the words came in both German and English. Hannah recognized passages from Scripture. The familiar words somehow made new in this stripped-down setting. Noelle's deep voice joined others in hymns sung without instruments, the pure voices filling the bare room with unexpected beauty. After the service, families gathered outside in the shade of old oak trees. Women spread out simple meals on wooden tables while children played in the grass. Hannah helped distribute bread and cheese, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her movements. Such a worldly past, she overheard one woman murmur to another. And in such condition, what was Brother Yoder thinking? The English ways cling to her still. Another added softly, "Can she truly fit among us?" Hannah's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high and her hands busy. She had endured worse judgment in town. At least here, the criticism came wrapped in concern rather than contempt. A small tug at her skirt drew her attention downward. Ruth stood there, looking up with solemn eyes. Without a word, the little girl slipped her small hand into Hannah's, holding on with complete trust. Hannah's heart swelled at this simple gesture of acceptance. "Would you like to help me serve the peach pie?" Hannah asked softly. Ruth nodded, and together they carried plates to the elderly members first, just as Noelle had taught them. Hannah noticed him watching them from across the gathering, something gentle softening his usual stern expression. The ride home was quieter, the heat of the day making everyone drowsy. Ruth leaned against Hannah's arm, her bonnet askew. The sun hung low in the western sky by the time they reached the farmhouse, painting everything in honey gold light. That evening, after supper, dishes were cleared away. Hannah sat in the rocking chair with Ruth in her lap. The little girl's eyes grew heavy as Hannah began to hum a German lullaby her own mother had sung to her. The familiar melody filled the quiet room with memories of comfort and safety. "Guten Abend, gut Note," she sang softly, rocking slowly. My tea rosen bedacht, Ruth's breathing deepened as she nestled closer, completely relaxed in Hannah's arms. The trust in that small gesture brought tears to Hannah's eyes. She continued humming, her hand gently stroking Ruth's hair. A floorboard creaked, and Hannah looked up to find Noelle standing in the doorway. He watched them with an expression she had never seen before, something tender and wondering, as if seeing his household anew. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with unspoken possibility. Later, after Ruth was tucked into bed, Hannah knelt beside her own narrow bed. The candlelight threw soft shadows on the wall as she whispered her evening prayers. From somewhere in the house, she heard Noelle's deep voice, also raised in prayer. Their separate devotions twining together in the darkness like harmony and melody. A fragile warmth had begun to grow in this house, not the fierce heat of passion or the bright flame of excitement, but something steadier. It was like banked coals in the cook stove, providing quiet heat for bread to rise and soup to simmer. Hannah touched her rounded belly, feeling the baby move beneath her hand, and wondered if perhaps God's grace could truly make a family from such unlikely pieces. Golden September light washed over the fields as Hannah bent to lift another basket of winter squash. Her back ached, and the baby's weight made every movement a challenge, but determination kept her going. Nearby, Noelle worked steadily, his strong hands gathering the last ears of corn from stalks that rustled in the autumn breeze. "You should." "Rest," he called over, concern evident in his voice. Hannah straightened, brushing dirt from her apron. "The harvest won't wait," she replied, managing a smile. "And I'm stronger than I look." Ruth darted between the rows, collecting fallen corn. Husks in her small basket. The little girl had become Hannah's constant shadow these past months, following her through daily chores with eager HELPFULNESS. As the sun climbed higher, Hannah's arms trembled with effort, but she pressed on. Each basket filled was proof of her worth to this household. Noel watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she never complained, even as sweat dampened her collar. When afternoon came, Hannah made her way into town for the weekly quilting bee. The general store's back room hummed with activity as local women gathered around the frame, needles flashing in the light from tall windows. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Yoder," Sarah Miller said, making room at the frame. Her tone held a hint of challenge. "How are you managing with those plain folk ways?" Hannah threaded her needle with steady fingers. "Very well, thank you." She began stitching neat, even lines across the fabric. "Must be awful dull out there," another woman commented. "No music, no parties, no proper church service even." "Different isn't dull," Hannah replied, her voice quiet but firm. "The Amish. Ways have their own beauty." Sarah snorted. "Beauty? In those dark clothes and bare walls." Hannah's needle paused. She looked up, meeting the women's curious stares. "There's beauty in simplicity," she said. "In honest work and quiet worship. In a home where every object has purpose, where nothing is wasted or shown off for pride's sake." The women exchanged glances, surprised by her passionate defense. "Surely you miss regular society," Mrs. Peterson pressed. "All those strict rules and customs. The rules protect what matters," Hannah answered. "Family, faith, community." Her hands moved steadily across the quilt as she spoke. "Noel, Mr. Yoder, has shown me that living plainly doesn't mean living poorly. His ways may be different from what I knew before, but they're good ways." Unknown to Hannah, Noel stood just outside the door, having come to deliver lumber to the store. He listened, something warming in his chest at her words. Sarah said after a moment, "You certainly sound convinced." "I am." Hannah smiled slightly. "The Yoders took me in when others turned away. Their plain life has given me more than any fine house could." The afternoon light slanted golden through the windows as the women worked. Gradually, the conversation shifted to other topics: harvest yields, winter preparations, recipes for apple butter. But something had changed. The sideways glances at Hannah held more respect now, less judgment. When Hannah emerged from the store later, she found Noel waiting. With the wagon, he helped her up to the seat, his hands gentle. "I heard what you said," he told her quietly as they drove home. "About our ways," Hannah flushed. "I meant it all." The evening settled soft around the farmhouse as lantern light spilled from its windows. Inside, the kitchen filled with warm scents of potato, soup, and fresh bread. Ruth set the table, while Hannah ladled steaming bowls full. They sat together, heads bowed for grace. The lantern cast a gentle glow over their simple meal: soup, bread, apple slices, and fresh milk. Ruth's face shone as she dunked her bread in her soup, looking contentedly. From Hannah to her father. "Hannah," Noel said suddenly, his deep voice unusually soft, "I want to thank you." She looked up, surprised. "For all you do here," he continued. "The work in the fields, the care of our home." He glanced at Ruth. "The love you show my daughter." Hannah's eyes grew damp. "You gave me shelter when I had none," she whispered. "How could I do less? You've done far more." His steady gaze held hers. "You've brought life back to this house." The Lord's hand was surely in bringing you here." For a moment, the kitchen felt full of something more than lantern light, a warm glow of belonging that Hannah had never expected to find. Ruth reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it with childish affection. Noel's eyes held approval, even admiration. When they met hers across the table for the first time since stepping off that train months ago, Hannah felt truly at home. Not just sheltered, but seen. Not just tolerated, but treasured. Joy-filled. Her heart like sunshine warming every corner of the plane. Perfect kitchen. The crisp autumn morning shattered with the sound of hoofbeats approaching the farmhouse. Hannah looked up from hanging laundry, her heart skipping as a sleek buggy pulled by two matching bay horses rolled into their yard. A well-dressed man stepped down, his polished boots incongruous against the dusty earth. "Mr. Yoder." The stranger called out, consulting a leather portfolio. "I represent the Western Railroad Company." Noel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work clothes. His expression remained neutral, but Hannah noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. "I am authorized to make you a generous offer." "For your land," the lawyer announced, pulling out official-looking papers. "These water rights are particularly valuable to our expansion plans." Hannah's fingers clutched the damp sheet she held, watching as Noel walked closer to the man. Ruth peeked out from behind the kitchen door, eyes wide. "This land is not for sale," Noel stated simply, his voice firm but calm. The lawyer's pleasant expression hardened. "Mr. Yoder, surely you understand progress cannot be stopped. The railroad needs this water source for our steam engines. God gave us this land to tend," Noel replied, "not to sell. We can make this difficult," the lawyer warned, his tone growing cold. "Think of your family." Hannah shivered despite the warm sun. The lawyer's eyes flickered to her rounded belly, then back to Noel. "I have thought of my family," Noel answered. "My answer remains no." The lawyer climbed back into his buggy, his face tight with anger. "You will regret this stubbornness, Mr. Yoder." Days passed with underlying tension, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. At the general store, Hannah overheard whispered conversations that made her blood run cold. "That soldier fellow's working with the railroad now," one woman murmured to another. "Says he'll run that Amish fool off the land one way or another." Hannah hurried home, her purchases forgotten. When she told Noel, he simply nodded, as if expecting. This development, that night, Hannah woke to strange sounds outside. Noel was already pulling on his boots, lantern in hand. She followed him to the well, where they found the wooden cover torn away and the bucket lying in the dirt. "No, Hannah," gasped, seeing the fouled water below, deliberately contaminated with soil and debris. "Our only water source," Noel's face was grim in the lantern light as he examined the damage. "They mean to drive us out," he said quietly. Hannah's hands trembled as she gripped her shawl. "This is my fault," she whispered. "The soldier, the railroad, they're using me to hurt you." Noel turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "No, this fight was coming whether you were here or not. The railroad wants our water. They would have found another way." Through the next day, Noel worked tirelessly to repair the well. Hannah watched him haul bucket after bucket, cleaning out the contamination, while Ruth helped carry fresh water from the creek for their immediate needs. That evening, Hannah found Noel in the barn, kneeling in prayer. Tease's words, spoken in Pennsylvania German, carried the weight of deep concern. She stayed silent, not wanting to interrupt his communion with God. Later, as they sat at the kitchen table, Noel spoke plainly. "This fight is bigger than just your child now," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "They want our land, our water. Without it, we cannot survive here." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to bring such trouble to your door," she said, her voice breaking. Perhaps if I left, no. Noel's response was immediate and firm. You belong here now, with us. His hand reached across the table, briefly touching hers. We'll face this together with God's help. But that night, lying in her bed, Hannah heard Noel's heavy footsteps pacing the floor below. The sound of his quiet prayers drifted up through the floorboards as he struggled with the weight of their situation. She pressed her hands against her swollen belly, feeling the baby move within. Lord, she whispered into the darkness, please don't let my presence destroy this good man's home. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the fields and the autumn. Wind rattled the shutters. Akana lay awake long into the night. Torn between gratitude for Noel's protection and fear that her very presence might cost him everything he held dear, Ruth's small voice startled her from her thoughts. Hannah. The little girl stood in the doorway, clutching her rag doll. I'm scared. Hannah lifted her blanket, and Ruth crawled in beside her, snuggling close. Papa says God will protect us, the child whispered. Your papa is a wise man, Hannah replied, smoothing Ruth's hair. But her own heart was heavy with worry, wondering if their small family's faith would be enough to weather the gathering storm. The autumn weeks crept by with a steady drip of troubles. Like water wearing away stone. Hannah woke one morning to find strange hoofprints crossing their wheat field, the young stalks trampled flat. Noel said nothing, but his jaw tightened as he surveyed the damage. 3 days later, Ruth came running from feeding the chickens, her face pale. Papa, there's a man watching from behind the barn. By the time Noel reached the barn, the stranger had vanished, leaving only footprints in the mud and an uneasy feeling that clung like morning mist. Despite these shadows, Hannah threw herself into making their house a home. Each morning, she sat with Ruth at the kitchen table, guiding the child's small hand as they practiced letters and chalk on her slate. See here, Hannah would say, forming the curves of each letter carefully. This is how we write family. Ruth's tongue would poke out in concentration as she copied the word. Her writing wobbly but determined. The old wood stove became Hannah's ally as she kneaded bread daily, not just for their table, but for neighbors too. The rhythm of working dough beneath her hands brought comfort, and the scent of baking bread filled their home with warmth. She wrapped each golden loaf in clean cloth, sending them home with families after church or with farmers passing there. One crisp evening, the Amish community gathered for their monthly supper at the meeting house. Long tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought by each family. Hannah had contributed her best apple strudel, made from Ruth's careful gatherings in their small orchard. The meal began peacefully enough, but then the whispers started, carrying across the wooden tables like autumn leaves skittering across. The ground? That soldier's still in town, one woman murmured. Shame about the Yoder place, another added. Such trouble they've brought on themselves. Hannah's hands trembled as she set down her fork. She felt Ruth press closer against her, sighed, and Noel's steady presence beside them both. The whispers continued, growing bolder, until Hannah could bear it no longer. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent. I know what you all think of me, she said, her voice clear and steady, despite her racing heart. A fallen woman who brought trouble to a good man's door. But Noel Yoder showed me Christ's love when others showed only judgment. He gave me and my unborn child a home when we had none. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly as she continued. This man, this family, is my life now. I would rather lose everything else than betray the trust they've given me. The silence that followed felt heavy as summer storm clouds. Then old Mary Stoltzfus, respected by all, slowly nodded. The girl speaks truth, she declared, and shows more courage than those who whisper behind hands. Something shifted in the room, like ice breaking in spring. Women who had turned away now met Hannah's eyes. Men who had avoided Noel now clasped his shoulder as they passed. The walk home that night was quiet but peaceful. Ruth had fallen asleep in the wagon, and the steady clip-clop of their horses' hooves matched the rhythm of crickets in the grass. Their lanterns swung gently, casting moving shadows across the rutted road. Near their gate, Noel drew the wagon to a halt. The stars spread above them like scattered grain on a threshing floor, brilliant in the clear night air. "What you said tonight," Noel began, his voice soft but certain. "About this being your life now," Hannah's heart quickened. A T meant every word. "When I claimed you that day," he continued, "it was duty that moved me. I could not see a woman in need cast out." He turned to face her, his eyes catching the lantern light. "But now I see God's hand in it. Providence, not just duty." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Providence. Yeah," he said softly. "He knew what my heart needed, even when I did not." The night air seemed to still around them. Noel's hand found hers in the darkness, work-roughened fingers gentle against her skin. When he leaned forward, his kiss was as soft as a prayer whispered in candlelight. Ruth stirred in her sleep, murmuring something sweet and indistinct. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, not tears of fear or shame this time, but of joy. Here, under the vast prairie sky, she had found not just shelter, but love, not just duty, but destiny. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Noel or to God, she wasn't quite sure. His smile, rare and precious as summer rain, was answer enough. Together, they turned toward home, the lantern light leading them through the darkness, their hearts as bright as the stars above. The crisp autumn days that followed their tender moment at the church supper seemed touched with golden light. Hannah found herself humming old German hymns as she worked, their melodies drifting through the farmhouse like honeyed sunshine. The simple tasks that had once felt like penance now brought joy: kneading bread, hanging laundry in the brisk wind, teaching Ruth her letters. Ruth's laughter, once so rare, now bubbled up like water from a spring. She would skip alongside Hannah in the garden, helping to gather the last of the late vegetables, her small hands eager to assist. "Can I help with the baby's quilt?" she asked one afternoon, fingers tracing the colorful squares Hannah was piecing. "Together? Of course, Liebchen," Hannah answered, showing her how to sort the fabric scraps by color. The tender way Ruth arranged each piece made Hannah's heart swell. Even Noel's usual reserve had softened. His good morning carried warmth that hadn't been there before. When their hands brushed passing the butter at breakfast, he no longer pulled away. At evening prayers, his deep voice reading scripture wrapped around them like a sheltering cloak. But their peace shattered on a bright Tuesday morning when hoofbeats approached the farm. Hannah looked up from where she was sweeping the porch to see Sheriff Jameson riding up, his face grave as storm clouds. Her heart seized. She knew, even before he spoke, that trouble had found them. Noel came from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Sheriff," he said quietly, positioning himself between Hannah and the lawman. "Mr. Yoder." The sheriff dismounted, holding a leather document pouch. "I wish I was bringing better news." He glanced at Hannah, his expression heavy with regret. "Perhaps we should speak inside." Ruth was sent to play in the yard while they gathered at the kitchen table. Hannah's hands trembled as Sheriff Jameson laid out the papers, their crisp edges stark against the worn wood. "The soldier, James Crawford is his name, has filed legal claim in territorial court." The sheriff's words fell like stones in still water. "He's declaring himself Hannah's lawful husband, demanding custody of both her and the unborn child." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered. "Me never. There were no vows, no ceremony. He's claiming common law marriage based on your time together." The sheriff couldn't quite meet her eyes. Says he can bring witnesses who knew you as his wife. Lies, Noel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. All of it. Maybe so. Sheriff Jameson sighed. But the territorial judge will have to sort it out. Crawford's got himself a sharp lawyer, paid for by those railroad men who want your water rights. They're pushing for a quick hearing before the baby comes. Hannah pressed her hands against her rounded belly, feeling sick. The thought of being torn away, of her child being born into that man's custody, made her world spin. What can we do? Noel asked, and Hannah heard the strain beneath his calm tone. Fight it in court. The sheriff gathered the papers. Get yourself a good lawyer. But I won't lie, it could get ugly. Crawford's been making threats in town, saying how he'll see you ruined, Mr. Yoder, for stealing his woman. After the sheriff rode away, Hannah fled to her room. The walls seemed to close in as darkness gathered. She lit the lamp with shaking hands, but its glow offered no comfort. Tears flowed freely as she imagined being dragged away, her baby born in shame. Ruth's confused face as Hannah disappeared from her life. A soft knock came at her door. Hannah. Noel's voice was gentle. She couldn't answer past her tears, but he entered anyway. Without hesitation, he crossed to where she sat and took both her hands in his. His grip was warm, strong, sure. Listen to me, he said, kneeling before her. I will not let him take you. But the law is not God's law. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. When I claimed you that day, I made a vow before heaven. You are my wife. That child is my child, and no earthly court can break those bonds. Hannah stared at their joined hands through her tears. I'm so afraid, she whispered. What if he wins? What if they force me to go with him? Then I will follow. Noel's voice was iron-wrapped in velvet. I will sell everything, leave my land, and find you. I will not rest until you and our children are safe. His words, our children, made fresh tears spill. She could see the cost of such a vow written in his face. For an Amish man to leave his land, his community, it would mean losing everything he had built. I'm not worth such sacrifice, she managed. You are worth everything. He reached up to brush tears from her cheek. You and Ruth and this little one, you are my family now. And family does not abandon family. They sat together in the lamplight, hands clasped as night deepened around the farmhouse. Though neither spoke of it, both could feel the storm gathering on the horizon. Dark clouds of trouble rolling in like thunder across the prairie. The winter wind howled across the prairie, like a wild thing, rattling the farmhouse windows and finding every tiny crack in the weathered boards. Hannah pulled her shawl tighter as she made her way from the chicken coop, clutching 3 precious eggs against her chest. Her steps were slower now. Her belly grown so large she had to watch her footing on the frozen ground. Inside the barn, the lantern cast warm circles of light as she helped Noel with the evening milking. Her hands ached from the cold, but she kept working, determined to prove her worth. The cow's warm flank pressed against her arm as she settled onto the wooden stool, her swollen ankles protesting. You should rest, Noel said quietly, forking fresh hay into the stalls. The baby comes soon. I can manage, Hannah insisted, though exhaustion weighed on her like a heavy quilt. She would not be idle, not with the lawyer's threats hanging over them all. Ruth sat nearby on a hay bale, feeding bits of dried apple to her pet rabbit. The child seemed to sense the tension in the air, speaking less and staying closer to them. Both. When Hannah stumbled slightly while rising, Ruth darted forward to steady her, small hands gentle against Hannah's arm. Later, after Ruth was tucked into bed, Hannah stood at the kitchen window watching snow begin to fall. The flakes danced. In the lamplight, thick and silent. Behind her, Noel stoked the fire, the poker scraping against iron grate. Something troubles you tonight, he said. Not a question, he had grown skilled at reading her moods. Hannah pressed her palm against the cold glass. The weight of secrets felt suddenly unbearable, crushing her chest like a stone. "I need to tell you everything," she whispered. About him. About what happened." Noelle set the poker down carefully. "Only if you wish to." Her voice trembled as she began. "I was a servant girl in Philadelphia, in a fine house. He came often, an officer, so handsome in his uniform. He brought me little gifts, spoke so sweetly. The memories rose like bitter smoke. Said he would marry me properly, once his commission came through. I believed him. Foolish girl that I was, I believed every word." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she continued. When I found myself with child, he laughed. Said no officer would marry a common servant, that I was nothing but sport to pass the time." Her hands clenched into fists. "He was already married, had a wife back east. Everything had been lies." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Hannah could not bear to look at Noelle, certain she would see disgust in his eyes. "My mistress cast me out. I had nowhere to go." The mail order notice seemed like Providence, a widower out west, wanting a wife. A sob caught in her throat. I thought I could start fresh, where no one knew my shame. But now he has found me, and he will destroy everything. Hannah." Noelle's voice was so gentle it broke something inside her. "Look at me." She turned slowly, expecting judgment. Instead, she found him kneeling on the rough floorboards, his face lifted in prayer. "Dear Father in heaven," he began, his deep voice steady and sure. "We come before you with this child of yours who has carried such heavy burdens. Grant her peace. Let her know that in your eyes she is precious and pure." Hannah's legs gave way. She sank to her knees beside him as he continued praying, asking God for protection, for healing, for redemption. His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, offering grace she had never dared hope for. "You are not stained in the eyes of the Lord," Noelle said when the prayer ended. "Nor in mine." She collapsed against his chest, weeping as his arms encircled her. All the shame and fear she had carried for so long poured out in great, racking sobs. Noelle held her through it all. One hand stroking her hair, the other pressed protectively over her rounded belly. "I do not deserve such kindness," she managed between tears. "Grace is not earned," he murmured. "It is freely given, as Christ gave for us all." Outside, snow continued to fall in the darkness, blanketing the farm in pristine white. The wind had died down, leaving only hushed stillness. Inside, by the dying fire, Hannah felt something shift and settle in her heart, a peace she had thought forever lost. Noelle's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "You are my wife," he said simply. "That child is my child. God has brought you to this home for a purpose, and I will stand against any man who tries to break what he has joined." Hannah looked up into his face, seeing not just duty there now, but deep and abiding love. A love forged in shared trials, tempered by faith, and sealed with forgiveness. In that moment, she knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. The one-room church sat nestled among bare winter trees, white-clapped walls gleaming in the weak January sunlight. Inside, rough-hewn benches groaned under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she sat beside Noelle, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Judge Morton presided from behind a makeshift bench, really just a table borrowed from Sunday services. His stern face betrayed nothing as he shuffled through papers, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the tense quiet. The soldier stood near the front, newly pressed uniform, unable to hide the signs of heavy drinking. His boots were muddy, his eyes bloodshot as they fixed on Hannah with unsettling intensity. She instinctively pressed closer to Noel, drawing strength from his solid presence. Whispers rustled through the crowd like dry leaves. Some faces showed sympathy, others judgment. Hannah recognized women from the quilting circle. The shopkeeper who had started giving her extra penny candy for Ruth. The miller's wife who had shared sourdough starter. "The court will come to order," Judge Morton announced, his voice filling the small space. "We are here to settle the matter of custody and marriage rights regarding Hannah Weber Yoder." The soldier stepped forward, chest puffed with false confidence. "Your Honor, that woman carries my child. She was promised to me before this. This plain man took advantage." His words dripped with disdain. "I demand my rights as the natural father." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Hannah felt the weight of stares pressing down on her shoulders. But then Noel's hand found hers, warm and steady, and she drew in a deep breath, deep breath. Furthermore, the soldier continued, voice rising, "I have evidence that Yoder's land claim is disputed. His presence here is irregular. His marriage to Hannah, unlawful." "That's enough." Judge Morton cut in sharply. "Mr. Yoder, do you wish to speak?" Noel rose slowly, his plain black coat a stark contrast to the soldier's flashy uniform. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of stone. "This woman is my wife, this child my child. No law of man can sever what God has joined." Gasps echoed off the wooden walls. Hannah's eyes filled with tears at the quiet conviction in his words. Even some who had been whispering now fell silent, struck by Noel's unwavering certainty. As for the land, Noel continued, gesturing to 3 elderly Amish men who stepped forward. "My kin have brought the deeds." He laid out weathered papers, properly stamped and witnessed. "My father's father bought this land fair, worked it true. The railroad's claims are false." The soldier's face darkened with rage. "You simple fool. You think your primitive ways order." Judge Morton's gavel cracked like thunder. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah Miller, the baker's wife, stood up from her bench. "Your Honor, if I may speak?" At his nod, she continued, "I've watched Hannah these past months, seen her gentleness. With young Ruth, her hard work, despite her condition. She brings light to that home." Others began standing. The shopkeeper spoke of Hannah's honesty. The miller's wife described how Hannah had nursed her sick child without being asked. Even the stern-faced seamstress admitted Hannah's skill with needle and thread. The soldier's confidence began to crack. He shifted from foot to foot, sweat beading on his brow despite the winter chill. Judge Morton leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I have here," he said, producing an official-looking document. "A report from the Army. It seems you deserted your post after charges of misconduct were filed. You are no officer, sir, merely a fugitive from military justice." The soldier's face went pale. "That's lies." "I demand you'll demand nothing," Judge Morton thundered. "This court finds in favor of Noel Yoder. The marriage is valid, the child legally his. Furthermore," he added, as the soldier began to protest, "I am obligated to report your whereabouts to the proper authorities." 2 deputies stepped forward from the back of the church. The soldier's bluster crumbled entirely. He backed away, wild-eyed, before turning to flee through the side door. The deputies followed at an unhurried pace, knowing he would not get far. In the winter landscape, Hannah's fingers tightened around Noel's hand as relief flooded through her. The nightmare was over. She was safe, truly safe. At last, the crowd began to disperse, but many paused to offer quiet words of support. Even some of Noel's Amish kin, who had been skeptical, now nodded in approval. Ruth, who had been sitting quietly with a neighbor, ran to wrap her arms around Hannah's waist. Judge Morton gathered his papers, pausing beside them. "Take good care of your family, Mr. Yoder. he said softly. "It seems God knew what he was about when he brought you all together." Noel simply nodded, one arm around Hannah, the other resting on Ruth's shoulder. They stood together in the empty church, a family forged by grace and made stronger by trial. While winter sunshine streamed through the windows like a blessing. Outside the farmhouse window, snow lay thick across the valley, transforming the world into a hushed blanket of white. Inside, Hannah's labor pains had started just before dawn. The town's midwife, Mrs. Bennett, arrived quickly through the drifts, followed by 3 Amish women with their black shawls dusted in snow. In the front room, Noel paced before the crackling hearth, his whispered prayers steady and fervent. Little Ruth held tight to his leg, her face pressed against the rough wool of his trousers. Every cry from upstairs made her grip tighter. Hours passed like molasses in winter. The sun climbed, then began to sink, casting long shadows across the snow. Finally, as evening approached, a new sound pierced the quiet, the strong, healthy wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Bennett appeared at the top of the stairs, beaming. "A fine boy," she announced. "Come up now." Noel carried Ruth up to find Hannah, propped against pillows, her tired face glowing as she cradled a bundle wrapped in a soft quilt. Tears filled Noel's eyes as he knelt beside the bed. With gentle reverence, he touched the baby's tiny hand. "My son," he declared, voice thick with emotion as surely as if God himself had given him to me by blood. Hannah's eyes welled up as Noel gathered them both in his arms, while Ruth peered wonderingly at her new brother. Lamplight cast warm circles in the room, holding winter's chill at bay as the family drew close together, complete at last, as spring. Whispers across the valley, the once divided community gathers at Noel's farm. The morning sun bathes the scene in golden light as men raise posts and secure beams for the new barn. Amish workers in dark clothing labor alongside townspeople in their colorful shirts, their hammers ringing out in harmony. 6-year-old Ruth moves carefully through the crowd, proudly carrying her baby brother. The women pause in their cooking to smile and coo at the infant who grasps at his sister's apron strings. He's getting so big, they marvel. The same neighbors who once turned away, now offering warm embraces. Hannah wipes flour from her hands to greet each arrival. Her eyes shine as she serves fresh bread to women who months ago had shunned her. Now they share recipes and stories, their laughter mixing with the steady thud of mollies. As evening settles, lanterns cast a warm glow in the newly raised barn. Voices lift in hymns that echo off fresh-cut beams. Noel finds Hannah's hand in the shadows, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You came as burden," he whispers, "but God revealed you as blessing." Hannah squeezes his hand. "Here is my true home," she replies softly. Outside, spring snow melts into promise as the family kneels together in prayer. Their faith and love as solid as the barn's new foundation. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.